and welcome to Week 12 of CNBC.com's Fantasy Football Weekly. My name's Brian Clark, and I'm sitting in for Dominic this week, who's on vacation. With us, as always, are the brothers Najarian, Jon and Pete, co-founders of OptionMonster.com. So let's get right to it, gentlemen. Jon, who is going to be your starter this week?
All right, my starter this week is Jordy Nelson, and the reason is he's Jordy Nelson. Number 2, you've got Aaron Rodgers. Number 3, he's playing against the hapless Minnesota Vikings. If he tore up Philly on a frozen tundra up in Green Bay, and I was up there in Lambeau Field last week, he is going to decimate the Vikings. I think this guy could go 3, maybe even 4 touchdowns. Okay, 3 touchdowns this week up in Minnesota. Start Jordy Nelson.
Okay. Pete, who are you going to start this week?
My starter this week is going to go right to Jay Cutler. And the reason I'm going with Jay is last week, threw for over 300 yards, threw a couple of touchdown passes. He looked great. I think this week he's ready to do it all over again. I think they're finally starting to find their rhythm on offense. They need to. If they don't find that rhythm now, they're in big trouble. I think they do find it. I think he throws for another 300 yards.
All right, then. Jon, who are you going to sit this week?
Sitter this week, Teddy Bridgewater for the Minnesota Vikings. Why? They're playing Green Bay. And with Clay Matthews and Julius Peppers both playing like they're 22 years old again, I think he's just going to be shut down. That's why I'm going to sit him this week.
Pete, who's your sitter this week?
My sitter this week is Drew Stanton. Now, last week he was my sleeper. I loved what he was able to do last week. Threw for over 300 yards, threw a couple of touchdown passes. That was great. This week's a lot different. He's got to go up to Seattle. That Seattle defense is hurting from last week's loss at Kansas City. They're still one of the best defenses in all of football. I think he's going to struggle at Seattle. I think that's why you've got to sit him.
Jon, who's going to be your sleeper for this week's action?
My sleeper this week, Andrew Hawkins. Yes, I'm going back to the well with this guy. Why? Because they're playing the Falcons' 27th ranked defense, and I think he's going to catch a bunch of balls, and he's under the radar because Cleveland, nobody knows anybody on that team, but they've been quietly winning.
All right. Pete, now it's your turn. Who's your sleeper this week?
My sleeper this week is LaShawn McCoy. Now, I know everybody loved him going into the start of the season. He was everybody's number 1 pick. He has not produced this year. I think he finally produces this week. After all of the struggling that he's had, averaging under 4 yards a carry, I think he explodes well over 100 yards this week. Tennessee's defense is terrible against the run. I think he absolutely rips them apart.
Thanks for your picks, guys. This week's number is 4.4. That's how many points Tampa Bay wideout Mike Evans got fantasy owners every time he caught a target last week, according to RotoWorld. That's pretty efficient for a rookie, and with 209 yards and 2 touchdowns in Week 11, Evans notched his 3rd straight game with more than 100 yards. And that's it for this week's CNBC.com Fantasy Football Weekly. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next week.